All right, welcome everyone. We are here at the Jane Austen Literacy Foundation for our first ever live event that we're doing. We're super excited to be starting this conversations with authors, other guests that we're going to be having, and hopefully get to know them and learn a little bit about their background, their relationship to Austen, and just have a good time. So for our first guest ever, we have Carol Lisa O'Brien, which I am super excited to be speaking with you today. You have made a huge contribution to the channel, really helped us kick off with Sanditon Season 2 that you painstakingly put together. We're going to talk about the process and everything that went on with it, but welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here and talk about Sanditon.
Yes, it's always a good day when we're talking about Jane Austen.
Yes, my favorite topic.
Exactly. So we have a few standard questions that we wanted to ask all of our guests that we had on here. So first off, I feel like this is the really obvious question, but we have to know, what is your favorite Jane Austen novel?
Well, no surprise, like most other fans, I think. I really like Pride and Prejudice. It was my introduction, and loved the wittiness and the sparkling character of Elizabeth. And just the main thing I think was how Jane took a character that you hated. I absolutely hated Darcy when I first started. Well, I saw the 1980s version of Pride and Prejudice first. I absolutely hated him until I didn't, and it was just such a big turnaround. And that's what draws me into that book.
And her brilliance in making us flip that love-hate relationship with her characters is really good.
Mm-hmm.
And next question.
She was excellent.
She is. Next question is, what is one of the first books that you remember really having an impact on you, making you want to read more and just grasping you and capturing your imagination?
Well, some of the earliest books I read, were probably read to me, were the Little House on the Prairie books. And I probably identified with Laura Ingalls Wilder, just because she was, just a common little girl, I felt like, and had some of the same reactions that I would to her friends and what was happening. And I read them so much, I feel like I'm almost, as I go through my life and certain seasons hit, and like, if there's been times when we didn't have enough money, I would think, oh, well, how can we, how can we do with what we have? And I really look back to her series where they were, they did what they had to do to survive the pioneering times. So that made an impact. But one book that I really remember as just falling in love with was called The Velvet Room. And I don't hear people talking about it. It's a children's book, but it's about this migrant girl in California who discovers a large abandoned house with a room in it that has velvet curtains all around and a library, and she goes there secretly to read. And I fell in love with that idea. That was just drew me in, like you said.
I've never heard of that book, but it sounds amazing. I'm going to go look it up. Yeah, I love the tie in there. And also, I think that's part of the reason why so many of us love Austen is there's a common thread of humanity that just stays with us with the Laura Ingalls Wilder books. We can put ourselves in those same situations. We might not be living out on the prairie, and we might not be living in the Regency era, but we feel a connection to these characters that we're reading that really makes us want to get to know them more and continue on the story with them, which is what you did for us with Sanditon. So kind of what grabbed you and made you want to take on this story?
Well, the fact that it was unfinished, which I think is, several others have done that too. And that was my thought was, well, and the TV series left it in such a place, it was just like, you knew that it was supposed to continue.
Right.
And then when we found out it wasn't, that just wasn't acceptable. So somebody's got to finish it. So a lot of people have, and I thought it was a really big challenge because Andrew Davies and Justin Young left the characters in places that were really, really hard to come back from, as far as Sydney was, I think.
Yeah.
And so that was a big, big challenge. How do you bring a character that you really don't like, kind of like Mr. Darcy, but maybe even worse?
Yeah.
I felt like I did not like him even more than I did not like Mr. Darcy when I first saw Pride and Prejudice, because I don't know, his unkindness just seemed like there's no possible way that there could be a good reason for that unkindness.
Right.
And, sometimes there's not. But how to bring him from somebody that you hated to realizing the background behind him and what caused him to be like that, and that there's actually a lot of part of his character that's actually good that you didn't know about, and so bringing that out. Mm-hmm. And that was a big challenge, and I really loved figuring that out, and feel like it came together really well at the end.
So what did you do first? So you watched the show and realized you needed an ending, and you were going to just Elizabeth Bennet take this on yourself?
Yep, pretty much. Pretty much. Well, I think because of the pandemic, I don't think I would have done this without it being in the pandemic. But because of that, I got more, I was on Facebook more, and I discovered fan fiction, and really I've never known that fan fiction existed. So Sanditon was my first, a little bit of Jane Austen. I'd read a little bit, but I did not realize that whole world was out there. And when I started seeing the people that were so passionate about Sanditon, I was like, there is a big group of people here that would love to see this finished.
Yeah.
And not only did I want to write it, but I didn't want to write it and have it sit online or sit on a shelf, on my shelf, because, publishing is hard work.
Yes.
And I don't know if it would get published. And I wanted it accessible. And I thought, here's some people that will help me bring it to life, because they are so passionate about the show. And so I wrote it knowing that I wanted to have it, said as a Zoom play. I wanted it spoken. Yeah. So I knew there was a possibility for an audience, and that inspired me to write it in time to get it produced during the pandemic.
That's a common thread. I did not realize that this whole other world of fan fiction for Jane Austen existed until the pandemic, and then it just opened this whole door of magical more Austen to read and to find and to see. With yours is, one of the only online, this sort of Zoom atmosphere that brings a story to life for us. So how long did it take you then from when you started writing to when you were actually able to start doing the Zoom filming?
I think I started somewhere in March of 2020, which was right when the pandemic started. And that had been pretty soon after the series finished in the US. I think it was on, January and half of February, maybe. And so we were still pretty fresh. And so then March through to, I'd say I had a pretty well done in September, and writing for a few hours each day, probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 days a week. And then it was just constant rewrites. It just wasn't good enough. But I really think that the marination for those few months after it was already written helped it just get so much better. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and so then, probably about 6 months.
And then you had to put together this whole cast. Did that feel overwhelming of how am I going to find people to take this on? Or did you feel like now that you had written the screenplay, it was going to come together?
I'm pretty optimistic. I think I'm a Tom Parker as far as, thinking I can do the impossible. And once I realized, back in March that there were this huge fan club that just loved Sanditon, I thought, well, I can at least get several ladies and somehow I can, scrounge together the men I need, because it doesn't seem like there's a ton of men in the Sanditon Fans Club, but there is at least one very, very avid fan of Thomas Hamby, and he's now written his own continuation. And so I knew there'd be one guy. And then I just kept, kept sending out inquiries to my friends and my relatives to see who I could get else. And it finally ended up probably a third were Sanditon fans. And then I just had a kernel of my friends and relatives, and then they ended up asking their friends and their friends, and that's how we got the other 20 people. So we ended up with about 30 people. So it's pretty exciting to see that all come together.
I love it. And that's truly, I feel like, what makes the Austen community so amazing is everyone is very friendly, very outgoing, very willing to help and put time and effort into continuing the love that goes on and put their heart and soul into projects like this to make it happen. And it was all volunteer. It was all time given, which is just fantastic. Do you have any little funny speed bump along the way stories you could tell us about the project?
Well, speed bumps. Well, I was really surprised that, I came to each episode dressed up, expecting that maybe somebody wouldn't be there that day, and I'd just have to step in for a character. And that pretty much never happened. The first two episodes, we did have a gal that was going to play Diana, and she had to work interfered, and so I had plenty of people stepping up saying, I want to play Diana. So that I didn't end up having to play any major character. But it was kind of a snafu for the first 3 episodes. We had people kind of rotating in and out of characters. Arthur was a few different people, and so was Diana, and the Beaufort girls kind of alternated whoever was there that day. But otherwise, we had pretty solid. The rest of the way through, the characters were, the same person, and so that turned out much better than I thought it might have. We didn't have no major problems.
That's fantastic.
I know, it was wonderful. And well, like half the way through, I had no experience in knowing how long episodes would take. And so after about 2 or 3 episodes, I finally realized that to read 27 pages without rehearsal takes 2 to 2.5 hours. So then I looked at the rest of my script and I was like, oh, shoot, that's going to take more than 8 episodes. And so I asked everybody if they'd be willing to, stay for 10, and everybody was just like, yeah, sign me up. And nobody had a problem with it. I was just so happy about that. And then we ended up re-recording the first episode, because we hadn't used the Zoom backgrounds for that, because none of us were experienced with Zoom production. And I just didn't realize how much it would add. So we started with the Zoom backgrounds the second episode, and then we came back and everybody was willing to come back and re-record the first episode. So I just can't say enough about how happy I was about the willingness and eagerness of the cast.
I'm just astonished at how well it views being on Zoom. I would never have expected that something could come out of Zoom calls. It's really so much fun to watch.
Yeah. And you know what? I've really enjoyed listening to it as an audiobook, because really all the action is said. There's very little that relies on facial expressions, even though there are some really, really great facial expressions in some of the actors as we did it. But it's really great as an audiobook. So if you haven't watched it, I would say put it on in the car and just listen to it.
Great tip. Throw on your headphones. Go about your way, just listen if you don't have time for watching. Did you have a character that you just really took to when you were writing, that you found that you loved?
Yep. Dr. Jonas. So he was based, we don't know the personality of all of Jane Austen's friends and everybody, but there were a lot of tidbits that she put into some letters about a friend of her, or a doctor of her brother's, Henry, in London in 1815. Henry was having some stomach issues. And this doctor, would come to the house, as they did, and he became friends of the family, and so much so that he was even let in on the secret, I believe, of her authorship. And she really, really enjoyed his company from her letters. She says that. And so I looked up information on him. It was Dr. Charles Hayden, I believe. And he was the first person to discover a really good treatment for gout, which is Colchicum autumnale. He brought the uses of the stethoscope to London. And he's a really smart guy and sounds like very witty and sang well. So I brought those elements into Dr. Jonas, along with the idea that Jane, I think, told her sister Cassandra. She said there must have been some misunderstanding that he was an apothecary, so instead of a physician. So that idea came into play, and then just put him up against with a hypochondriac, and you can just imagine the sparks that are going to fly. And so that's what happened. It was not hard to write his character against Diana's, because there's going to be controversy, and she could use some reality brought into all her thoughts of her own illness, which were not true at all.
Right.
And but she has some really caring elements. She loves her family, and anybody that's sick, she wants to take care of them. And she's a great nurse. So there's that can be said for her. And so they get together, and that was fun.
Female Mr. Woodhouse, if you will.
Yeah, right. She was one of those. There was a lot of hypochondriacs in Jane Austen's writing.
Yeah.
So there was kind of a stock character.
I wonder if there was someone in her life that she was really taking inspiration from, and feeling like she really knew this character.
Mm-hmm. I've read that her mother was, really kind of, complained about her health a lot. So I'm guessing that weaved its way into some of those characters.
That's too funny.
Yeah.
Well, do you think there's any other screenplays on the horizon for you? Or more from?
Well, I think there's more that could be done with Sanditon when I think about it. I don't know if I'm going to write it or not, but I think there's more that could be explored with Mr. Stringer and Allison, because they're just barely getting to know each other. Even though he's already proposed. He knows what he wants. She doesn't yet. And then, but one thing I have already started is a screenplay on the book, The Blue Castle. Who knows if that'll come to anything, but I've started it. So that's by Lucy Maud Montgomery, that wrote the Green Gables series. And so far in the US, there's still a copyright on The Blue Castle, but I think it's going to be released soon. So that would be fun to see that come to screen.
I know there's a secret group of fans for that book. I have a few friends that absolutely adore that book. So I will let them know to be on the lookout. And one of them is working on her own screenplay right now of an Austen novel. So I have to connect you guys so you can chat.
Yeah.
Well, I am super excited to see what else comes from this. And thank you so much for the tip to listen to it as an audiobook, because I am not a huge TV watcher. So that is amazing. I'm going to go back and listen to the episodes now and take them in a new way.
Yeah, that'll be fun. And it does make a lot more sense if you've seen the series first, but tell me what you think listening to it, and tell me if it makes sense, because that would be awesome.
anyone that's watching, leave us a comment below. Let us know if you have watched it, who some of your favorite characters are, if you were planning on watching it. And you can also answer the questions, what is your favorite Austen novel? We would love to know. So we can chat more in the comments down below. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here with us and share so much love for Austen and for Sanditon and letting us know about exciting projects to come.
Oh, it's so much fun. Thank you so much, Melissa.
We will see all of you next month with another guest, and thank you for joining us.